I'm currently doing a course on evangelism for leaders, and for our preparation for our next session, we had to do something that we wouldn't normally do. So I thought I would share my testimony with you. So here goes. I grew up in a Christian home, going to Sunday school every week. First of all at the Salvation Army with my auntie and nana, then at a Methodist church with my mum, and then at a different one with my friends. But it wasn't until I went to Spring Harvest at the age of 18 that I felt God's call. At the time, I didn't know what it was. I just knew I felt different. I'd been attending the youth sessions at Spring Harvest, and something that was said by the leaders one day made me really think. I was being told about Jesus and God in an exciting way that I hadn't heard before. This made me think that being a Christian was exciting and not boring. So when I came home, I spoke to my minister about what I was feeling, and attending membership classes helped me deepen how I was feeling and got me asking questions I'd not thought of before. At first, I couldn't describe what happened to me. I just knew something inside me had changed. But then, after attending membership classes, I knew that I wanted to take the step of declaring publicly that I was a Christian and becoming a church member. At this time, I was feeling tentative about what the future had to hold, but also excited about it. I was joyful as I knew I was taking steps with Jesus, and the journey he had for me would make me a stronger person. Since the start of my journey, I've had ups and downs, including one point where I turned away from God. But once I came back, I knew it was the right thing to do, as even though at that point I'd given up on God, he had not given up on me. This made my faith stronger and helped me to become a better person. Being a Christian has given me opportunities that I would never have had. The people who I have met and become friends, not just locally, but in this country and beyond, have given me something to live for, and also a wonderful husband. My faith developed by joining in God's mission, which at first I didn't think anything of, but looking back was the start of the development of my calling. I have had a few different opportunities to share in God's mission. As Girls' Brigade and Boys' Brigade leader, and junior church leader in Hull, sharing about God with children and young people. Also as a local preacher, sharing God's message. I have also been on mission with Share Jesus International in Leeds, London and Dronfield. I've been on mission in Romania with Children for Christ through Girls' Brigade. All of this helped me to show God's love through action more than words. When I came back from Romania 12 years ago, I started to show God's love through action by doing Street Angels in Hull for 2 years until Matthew and I got married and moved to Harrogate. But although I felt being called into working with the church, I thought I had too much on to do anything about it. So I ignored the call as I knew Matthew was going forward with his call, and I thought we can't both follow our call at the same time. So I put my call on hold. Even though I was trying to ignore the call, things I've been doing over the last couple of years have continued to tell me that yes, the calling is there. I went on the Encounter course run by the Leeds District. At the end of the course, I knew that my calling was the right one. But again, I thought this is not the right time. I continued my preaching, working and helping with things at church to try and block out the call. I then started working for the Girls' Brigade and started to tell people about how Girls' Brigade can help churches reach out to children and young people and their families as a way churches could tell them about God. Again, the call continued to ring in the back of my mind. This ringing in the back of my mind continued while I studied at Cliff College on my third Asian Mission and Ministry course. Then my job came to an end, and I applied for a job, and during the interview I shared about my calling to work for the church, and although I didn't get the job, one of the bits of feedback that I received was that I should explore the role of a deacon and further and test my call. A couple of weeks after preaching at one of the churches in the circuit, someone came up to me and asked me if I'd thought of candidating. I told them I'd been thinking about candidating for the diaconate, and he smiled at me and said I should. After these things had happened, I prayed about it a lot and realised that God was showing me that the time was right to test the call. As it says in Jeremiah 29:11, "For I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future." I tested the call and candidated to become a deacon within the Methodist Church. I was accepted for training, but things still didn't feel right. It was in my third year of training that I realised that actually God wasn't calling me to ordain ministry, but to work for him within the church in a different way. Once I realised this, it felt like a huge weight was lifted off my shoulders. At that point, I was working in a charity shop, and although I was happy, there was something still niggling at me to do more. I then applied for the role which I'm doing now, as a pastoral worker, and although I started the role during the current pandemic, I feel that God has led me to the right role for me now, as I can put one of my favourite Bible passages into action. This passage is Micah 6:8. "He has shown you, a mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God." During my candidating process, I had to write a letter to one of the prophets, and I chose to write to Micah, and so I want to share that letter with you now. Dear Micah, I am writing to you to let you know that the message you gave from God is timeless, and over 2,000 years later, it is still read in our language. Your words, which are found in our Holy Scripture, are still relevant for speaking out for the poor and oppressed in the world. You, more than any other prophet of your time, showed concern for the poor and powerless. Throughout your preaching, you continually denounced the moral corruption and exploitation that was going on around you. Oh, how I wish this was not happening today. This is not just a problem in the country that you lived, it happens throughout the world. God hates injustice, corruption and false dealing, as much as he hates the worship of false idols and the manipulation of his laws to suit our own ends. The leaders of your time were doing just that. They twisted the laws of the land to suit themselves. Just like in your time, you had holders of power who oppressed the poor. It is the same for us today. The government of my country are oppressing the poor by sanctioning those who are on benefits, and people are in deep need because of this. If we don't follow your example and stand up to those that persecute the disadvantaged, how will they survive? You alternated visions of doom and denunciation with visions of hope and salvation. Your loving kindness and steadfast love came from your faithfulness to the covenant that will triumph over human wickedness. Salvation depends on the goodness of God, which is assured and eternal. Salvation will not be from other nations, but together with other nations, and it will be a salvation for the benefit of all, through universal peace. Many nations of the world have come together in the form of the United Nations to work towards this. You said, he will judge between many peoples and will settle disputes for strong nations far and wide. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nations will not take up swords against nation, nor will they train for war anymore. In my day, messages come through songs. Lots have been written over the years, which have agreed with what you said back then, by writers such as John Lennon and Michael Jackson. Also, rulers of nations such as Martin Luther King have given inspirational speeches. The finale from the musical Les Miserables also agrees with you when they sing, "They will live again in freedom in the garden of the Lord. They will walk behind the plowshare. They will put away the sword. The chain will be broken and all men will have their reward." We continue to pray for the universal peace that you spoke about all of those years ago. But with the wars that continue to happen around the world, I can't see this happening. The prophecies of salvation that were an important part of hope and prayer life of your people are still an important part of people's lives today. We have not learnt from what you said back then, as people have not learned and still go around making mistakes today. How will we ever learn if we don't heed what you had to say and listen to God? You told your people what God required of them. He has shown you, a mortal, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly with your God. This has been one of my favourite passages of Holy Scripture for some time. I was overjoyed when the President and Vice President of the Methodist Church took this passage and the theme of hope and justice for our church a few years ago. Just as hope and justice go together, so does what you say here. We can't do either without the other being needed too. We need to act justly and love mercy in order for us to walk humbly with God. The world we live in needs to act, and to act now, to help the refugees, the asylum seekers, the poor, the hungry. You spoke about this, and Jesus did too. Why haven't we listened? We sing songs as part of our worship, and one that is written by Tim Hughes says, "We must go, live to feed the hungry, stand beside the broken, we must go. Stepping forward, keep us from just singing, move us into action, we must go." We can't just sing or speak about it, we must do something and do it now. We can't continue to live in a world where people are treated unjustly. Micah, I want to be able to follow your example and help those who are less fortunate and stand up against those people who oppress people in our societies. Thank you for your timeless word that is timeless. Yours in thankfulness, Helen. So as my letter says, we can't just speak or sing what we feel. We need to take Micah's advice and act justly to help those who are less fortunate than us, as we need to live our faith in action, not just on a Sunday in church.